after the New Year's is, some financial resolutions, the top ones that you want to think about. We'll talk a little bit about some actual, financial matters that you might want to think about in planning mechanisms that you can use. But we're also going to be talking a lot about sort of how that impacts your estate planning and in the areas in which they intertwine, that and some elder law as well. Certainly, one of the biggest things you can think about doing is going in and meeting with your financial planner, or having a time at least set up to do that, towards the earlier part of the year, just because that's when everybody is starting their financial planning for the year. So again, I'm attorney Justin Randall. Thanks for joining us today at our first webinar of the year. We are talking about some financial resolutions, the top financial resolutions, and planning ideas that you want to get in your head at the start of the new year. So as I was just sort of mentioning, first and foremost, going in, talking to your financial planner, if you have one, is a really good idea. Kind of get a sense of where you're at for the year and what your goals are for the year. Are you looking forward to retiring soon, or are you trying to build up towards retirement, or are you just starting out in your financial, with your financial portfolio and building it up? So it's good to go in and talk with your financial planner at the beginning of every year, to really kind of sit down and map out your course for the year. A couple of things before I get too in depth. You are able, if you're participating via Zoom, you are able to send in Q&A questions, and I'll try to get to them as I see them pop up. And if anything comes up at any point that raises a concern or a question, please feel free to submit it. I'll be able to answer it as I see it come up. And as another thing as well is, if you have pre-registered and registered via Zoom, you will be receiving some materials from us. Today, what we have for you is our Hooper Law Office document finder. It's a sort of a grid chart that we have that is a place where you can put down for family members or people named as power of attorney agents in your plan, a place for them to kind of look up where you have everything. And by that, I mean, where do you keep your will? Where do you keep your trust? Those types of things, because it's really important to make sure that people know where things are, and also where do you do your banking? Where do you have all of your financial statements for people to look up? So those types of things are incredibly important for your agents and your executors or trustees to be able to look up. So it's really a useful tool I found for people. But yeah, so to get back into the swing of things here, like I said, talking with a financial advisor or your financial planner is a really good just first step at the beginning of every new year. Kind of end of every year and beginning of every year, or kind of some crossover of the two, is always a good idea, because you can really look at, all right, what happened last year? Where, how did we do? What are my goals for this upcoming year? But that's also a really good way for you to take a look at changes you might want to make in terms of strategy or in terms of the market. And I'm certainly no financial planner, so I won't be giving you any direct advice on what to invest in today. But the best thing I can tell you to do is go talk to that financial advisor. And if you don't have one, another thing to look at is look at getting one, possibly. These are professionals that are really helpful at what they do and really can guide you down a path, towards success when you don't really have a background in that area yourself. It's a useful tool for anybody. I mean, even attorneys need financial planners, right? The same way that financial planners need attorneys occasionally. So it's certainly not something you want to skip out on just because you think you can do it yourself. It's a good idea to go talk to somebody. Okay, so one of the biggest financial aspects that have changed over the last year, though, that does actually align a lot with estate planning is you may have heard of the Secure Act. So the Secure Act was a bill passed by Congress that says, or changed the way inherited retirement accounts work for beneficiaries. So it did a couple of things for you as the owner of the retirement account. It increased the age at which required minimum distributions have to occur. So no, it's no longer 70 and a half like it used to be. It's now 72. And this has been the case for about a year now as well. But if you're not familiar with it, it's something to keep in mind. But really where it impacts your estate plan is how it impacts your beneficiaries. It used to be, prior to this law passing, that beneficiaries, for the most part, got their life expectancy to take out those distributions from that, any remaining amount in a qualified retirement account, such as an IRA or a 401k. But now, because of the law change, barring a few very specific exceptions, which most people are not going to meet, most beneficiaries have a maximum of 10 years to take the entire account out. So if it's a larger retirement account or a larger chunk of a retirement account going to one or just a few beneficiaries, taking that out over 10 years versus what, under their life expectancy could have been potentially 20 or more for most beneficiaries. It increases the rate at which you're paying taxes and the bracket at which they're paying taxes. So the result of this law change is that more beneficiaries are going to be paying more tax, or at a higher rate rather, than they were prior to the law change. So it's something that you can actually plan around, though, to help minimize that for your beneficiaries. So one planning strategy that we recommend for a lot of people, and this is something you would want to work with your financial planner on, and a CPA to help you do tax planning around this. But a really good strategy to help your beneficiaries with these tax issues is to engage in Roth conversion strategy and planning for your IRA or 401k, so that you can stretch out the tax yourself over a longer period of time than your beneficiaries are going to have. It does require you to pay the tax on it, but you can actually use your tax brackets and stretch that out. So, over such a long period of time that you are paying actually less tax on it overall than would ultimately come out under this 10-year payout. So it's a really good tool, and it was a good tool even prior to this law change, but it's even more so a great tool now if your concern is your beneficiaries paying higher tax rates on what they receive from you. It's particularly an issue for if you have children who are in high income careers. If somebody's child was a neurosurgeon and they were about to receive, a couple $100,000 in an IRA, and they only have 10 years to take that out, they're going to be losing, a fair chunk of it to taxes then. So there's a lot of planning you can do around that to stretch that out over your lifetime and pay potentially at a lower rate yourself than your children will. So that is definitely a really good tool to look at if you're concerned about that law change, or you're concerned about those higher tax rates that your kids might end up paying on those 10-year payouts of inherited IRAs or 401ks. Now's a really good time to look at it, because you can kind of take a look at what last year's taxes were like, or what they will likely be like. I know pretty much nobody has filed their taxes yet for 2020, but you can get a pretty good idea of what your income was and versus what your child's income was. Obviously, this past year was a bit of an anomaly in some ways in terms of income brackets for people, just because of possible unemployment caused by the pandemic and things like that. But still, it's a really helpful thing to sit down with a CPA and a financial advisor and talk through that strategy. It may be that your kids are a much lower tax bracket than you two, and there are some exceptions to that 10-year payout rule. Especially if you have a minor child that's inheriting, that minor child of yours has a lifetime stretch until they reach 18, and then they have a 10-year stretch. So some beneficiaries do have the ability to stretch it out longer than 10 years. And it may not end up being a problem for everybody, but for the vast majority of the population, most beneficiaries are not going to meet these very narrow exceptions. So, keep this in mind. Talking about this document finder as well, sort of shifting gears a little bit here. But one of the best things you can do in terms of financial planning is not just, how you invest money or where you invest your money. It's in terms of estate planning, it's also, does your power of attorney for finance agent or your personal representative under the will or the trustee of your trust, do they know where you do all of your banking? Do they know who your financial advisor is? Do they know where you keep all of these records? And if it's all online, do they know how to get access to those online accounts? Do you have a password booklet or a password app if you have one of the password managing apps on your phone or on your computer? So that is really essential for those people to be, those agents to be aware of, because without access to those documents or without access to that information, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to do their job efficiently or even correctly. One of the worst things you can see happen is when somebody passes away or is incapacitated. I suppose this could be either or. That happens to their, somebody's parent or their loved one, and they're the person named as the trustee or as the personal representative, and they don't know where everything is or anything is. And especially when someone passes away and you don't know where things are, you sort of just have to, wait for statements in the mail potentially. You have to do a lot of digging to find things. And it makes everything take longer than it needs to. And it also makes that individual's job, the person who is the personal representative or the trustee, it makes their job a lot more difficult because now they don't just have a neatly kept file with everything in it or, easy access to it. So that is by far and away in terms of just traditional estate planning and helping your family out in terms of, making the process of dealing with someone's estate as easy as possible. Make sure the key players in your plan know where things are and know where you keep things. It's really important for them and it's really helpful. So that's the number one thing I can say. Don't be afraid to talk to them about it. You don't have to tell them all the information on it if you're very private about it, but you also want them to at least know where to look and how to get access to it. Don't throw it in a safe deposit box and then never speak to them about it. I guess this is the if you take nothing else away from this other than that, make sure people know where things are. Another area of planning that can become really important for depending on your age and the different financial planning you've engaged in over your life is looking at the cost of long-term care. So long-term care, meaning care in a assisted living facility, a skilled nursing facility, or at-home sort of nursing care. It's really expensive. Even affordable care is still in the neighborhood of around $4,000 to $5,000 a month potentially. So it's really something that a lot of people, I don't think, budget for when they're looking at retirement necessarily, or people think that they'll never need that type of care, or their loved one will just help out. So it's something you do want to plan for, though, because as nice as it is to think that you may never need that assistance or that you will have a family member provide care for you, sometimes they're not able to provide the care that you need and it actually is detrimental to you. And other times you just can't help but need that care. It would be great if no one ever did, but it does happen to a lot of people. So it is something that you want to budget for and you want to keep an eye out on. And these costs are not going down by any means. So don't think that 4,000 right now is a high amount. And that's, again, like I mentioned, on the very low end of that range. You can see costs up to about $11,000 a month for the highest level of care. So it's expensive, but there are things that you can do if you haven't done this already to look at how to pay for these options and how to protect yourself from having to spend through everything you've worked so hard to accrue over your life. The number one thing, we always recommend people look at if they haven't already looked at it and haven't gotten a quote on it is look at getting long-term care insurance. So long-term care insurance is different than like disability insurance or health insurance. It is a policy specifically geared towards paying for assisted living, at-home care, or skilled nursing facilities. And so that you don't have to spend through everything yourself before receiving assistance from programs such as Medicaid. It used to be that these policies would pay sort of indefinitely. If you had the higher end policies, that's getting rarer and rarer, and I don't think you would be able to find that anymore. But you can still receive a lot of assistance if you have one of these policies for a certain amount anyway. They'll generally have a lifetime maximum amount or a monthly maximum amount as well that they'll pay out. They usually divide it by day, but you can extrapolate that out over a month. This type of policy can be expensive. It ranges obviously depending on your age, your health, and all of those factors, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. But don't listen to your agent or not your agent, your neighbors, for example, on what you are, what they're paying for their care. Listen to the quote that you get from the company, for example. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you haven't looked at it, I highly encourage you to look at it. The ideal age, just so that you're aware to kind of begin looking at this, is in your mid 50s, later 50s. I suppose you could look at it sooner. You just generally at a younger age than that are unlikely to need it soon enough for that to make sense. But, once you get into your mid 60s, later 70s, it just does get very expensive just because of age alone, regardless of, health and all of that too. So it's something to keep in mind. Even if you are already kind of past the prime age to look at it, I would still, if you haven't looked at it, it can't hurt to get a quote, right? And this may not necessarily apply to everybody, watching this right now, but if you have loved ones or parents that are, close to that age as well to start looking at it, or possibly closer to maybe needing care themselves, this is the type of planning that you want to look into and at least get some idea of what cost would be. Another aspect, though, of long-term care planning here is whether or not you're really aware of what that cost was prior to me just mentioning it, of course. But it's not just, okay, can I afford to pay this out of my income, or what do I have in my assets? A lot of people don't tend to budget as much around, if just one spouse needs care. But what about the spouse still living out in the community, living at home? Where do they pay for things, or how do they pay for things? What about their cost of living? So that's another thing that you can really talk with a financial planner on and say, well, here are my concerns. Even if, we are able to pay for care, say I was making, 11 grand a month, just out of pocket and income, and was able to pay out of pocket for care regardless of having long-term care insurance. If that was all of mine and my spouse's income, well, how does the spouse live? What are they living off of? And do you have the assets accrued and the planning in place to help them maintain their way of life as well, and the care that they may need? So there's a lot of these things that you really want to keep in mind when you're looking at long-term care planning, not just, I never think I'm going to need it, or, son or daughter is going to take care of me. And it's not just long-term care insurance either. I mean, there's, especially when your long-term care insurance maybe doesn't cover the whole bill, or its maximum is not increasing with inflation. And it, after, 10, 20 years is not nearly as good of a policy as it was when you first got it, just because it didn't increase with inflation. So these sorts of, there's numerous factors that can play into planning around long-term care expenses and planning around how, you're going to be able to afford that care. And not, these policies are not going to be right for everybody, because of expense, because of health. And, that's okay. There are other things you can do as well, to plan around long-term care. Long-term care insurance tends to be the first line of defense against it, because you can maintain control over all of your assets when you have it. And it buys you some time when you go into a facility to meet, any private payment requirement that a facility has. For those of you unaware of that, what that means, that essentially means before a facility will allow you to reside in their facility while receiving Medicaid assistance, they may require upfront that you show you can pay for 1 to 2 to 3 years potentially. So that's what a private payment is, or private pay requirement is. So, that's a really good thing to plan around when you're looking at long-term care insurance. Is this enough? Does this buy me that, the ability to make it through that without necessarily having to spend through my assets, right? So, these are just a couple of the financial planning, topics that you're going to want to talk around, or talk with your family on, and talk with your advisor about this upcoming year. I certainly am not a financial planner myself, so I can't speak to what the markets are doing, or, what you might want to invest in this year in terms of that. The most I can say there is, if you have a financial planner, absolutely, if you haven't already, schedule the time to sit down and talk with them on that. But the most important thing from an estate planning perspective that you can do here is make sure that you have the ability to, locate your documents easily, or that the agents listed in your plan have the ability to locate your documents easily, as well as financial records, who you talk to in terms of who is your financial planner. And actually, that brings up a good point as well, is you should, at some point, if you haven't already, introduce your trustee or your personal representative or your financial power of attorney. Introduce them to who you work with for things like financial planners, or your CPA or your attorney. Because they're the ones who are going to have to interact with them later. So that having that introduction and knowing who to go talk to right away can really be helpful in terms of administering an estate, or just in terms of if you're incapacitated ever and they need quick access to something. So when you set up that appointment with your advisor, make sure you think about anyway inviting your agent, or your trustee or your personal representative, invite them with you, to attend the meeting with you. So I am not seeing any questions, but what I can always say is if you guys ever have any questions, you can always call our office at 920-993-0990. Or you can always email learnmore@hooperlawoffice.com. That we will get those emails and be able to answer those questions. If you haven't updated your estate plan in many, many years, and especially if you are a client of our office, set up a time to come in and talk to us. It's a good idea to have those plans looked at every couple of years, just to incorporate any law changes or life changes that you may have had. So I will always be an advocate for that. But just a little FYI, one of our upcoming webinars is, I mentioned a little bit about the Secure Act today. Coming up on January 20th, we do have an entire day, or 30 minutes or so, I should say, set aside to talk a little more in depth about the Secure Act and about some of those exceptions that I mentioned regarding the 10-year payout. As well as go a little more in depth into that planning that you want to do to help your children avoid some of those taxes, or beneficiaries rather. So thank you all for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys next week. And please feel free to reach out with any questions. If you have the opportunity, please feel free to fill out that feedback form that you'll be receiving from us later, and mark on there that you would like an initial consultation or for us to reach out to set something up to talk. If anything I talked about today raises any concerns for you, or you want us to sit down and talk a little more in depth about any sort of estate planning topics, really. So thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you guys next week.